Good evening, and thanks for joining us on The Week in Review. I'm Brandis Friedman. Nick Blumberg has the evening off. Federal immigration agents are set to hit Chicago's streets, putting Chicagoans on edge. But it remains unclear whether the National Guard will be joining the ICE strike team, despite President Donald Trump's promises.
Well, we're going in. I didn't say when. We're going in.
Local leaders, including Senator Dick Durbin and Governor J.B. Pritzker, pushed back as the Trump administration readies National Guard troops to deploy to Chicago.
Moving into Chicago with troops without invitation or without approval by the local officials is a serious constitutional mistake.
We're going to immediately go to court. If National Guard or other military troops are deployed to the city of Chicago, immediately go to court.
On Capitol Hill, senators grill Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. over changes to vaccine guidance and turmoil at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Sir, you're a charlatan. That's what you are.
If we don't end this chronic disease, we are the sickest country in the world. That's why we have to fire people at CDC.
But local infectious disease specialists say RFK Jr. is the problem.
This person is not making any sense. The people around him are making no sense. And the good people are all leaving. It's really a tragedy for public health in America.
And Northwestern University's president announces he's leaving after a tenure marred by a federal funding freeze, criticism over the school's response to the Trump administration, and a hazing scandal that rocked college sports. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are journalist and broadcaster Brandon Pope, Violet Miller from the Chicago Sun-Times, who's been working a whole lot, Madison Saavedra of Block Club Chicago, and from the Chicago Tribune's editorial board, Steve Daniels. Let's get right into it, because everybody's been working a whole lot, because this back and forth between the Trump administration and the Pritzker administration, it's been going on since last week, yet the president has yet to actually send in anyone that we can tell since he's been threatening to do. Violet, any word on when this might actually go down?
Yeah, so what we know so far is the National Guard obviously has not been authorized to deploy, but immigration agents and federal law enforcement has. So there are already 30 agents at Naval Station Great Lakes in North Chicago, about 40 miles north of the city. They've been practicing crowd control with flashbang grenades, shields, things like that. And 230 more federal agents are expected to arrive over the weekend, likely tomorrow night.
What is the expectation here? They'll deploy around the city, start rounding up immigrants, and then what, right? Could that incite the need for the National Guard?
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is that we're probably going to see immigration raids, not just in the city, but in the areas around the city, though concrete details have been scarce. In terms of what we're looking at here, in the emails that were leaked to me, this National Guard deployment was said to potentially mimic LA, where they had federal immigration enforcement come in first and kind of, shake things up, for lack of a better words. We get protests in response, and the National Guard is dispatched to protect federal law enforcement. So they wouldn't be, as in D.C., carrying out, day-to-day law enforcement, arrests, traffic stops, traffic checkpoints. They would be detailed with ICE on these immigration raids.
And, this is coming as we're hearing reports today that, ICE raids in Georgia rounded up hundreds of immigrants. Brandon, what do we know about how the National Guard could be used? What areas might we start to see them in?
Yeah, that's a big question. We know that where violence is targeted and really concentrated is the south and west side of the city. But what we've seen, if we follow the D.C. model, is that many of the National Guard troops have been in Georgetown, U Street. They've been in popular tourist areas. The strategy there is that you have the National Guard take on patrol of these popular sites. That way police can more focus heavily on the more dangerous areas and kind of allocate those resources. So many expect the same strategy to be deployed here in Chicago when it comes to that. But what can the National Guard actually do is still up for a lot of debate. They don't have arrest powers. They don't have police powers. They're kind of just mascots for public safety. So many think they're a deterrent to crime, right? I mean, you see them, they're militarized. they think that's going to stop crime, but there's no data to back up that's what happens, aside from what we've seen in D.C. so far, where crime has gone down over these past 3 weeks.
But a note on that, you know, a lot of federal grand juries, prosecutors have been dropping cases because these National Guard members, they're not trained in law enforcement. So we're seeing lots of, you know, illegal searches. We're seeing just violations of rights that are leading to these charges being dropped. So while there are more arrests, it's not, you know, turning out as the Trump administration might hope.
Like the case of the sandwich guy. We saw the viral guy that threw the sandwich at the guard there. They tried to bring a case against him. They couldn't do it.
And of course, J.B. Pritzker warning folks against throwing sandwiches at the National Guard. The governor is saying that state and local law enforcement will not be assisting immigration agents. Of course, he does not welcome the National Guard being deployed at the president's request. Steve, does the Trib editorial board, you all have a take on how the governor should be responding to this? And because we know the president has asked him to call him.
Right. Yes, we did. I think we wanted cooler heads to prevail in this war of words. The governor has been very hot on this subject, and you know, understandably in some respects, obviously, but what we have seen with the National Guard situation, unlike D.C., the president sort of, I think, without saying it explicitly, has said that, or maybe has acknowledged they don't have the same kind of authority. Certainly don't have the same kind of authority as they do in D.C. In L.A., there was they got a judicial ruling against them way after the fact, but still, you now have a judge that has said you cannot just send National Guard troops to do sort of general law enforcement if a governor doesn't ask you to do it. And so what we saw was the president saying, well, maybe we'll go to New Orleans instead because the governor there likes us. And so I don't know, we're going to see all of this play out once we get all these people on the ground and once we see everything happening. The fact that I guess remains that the city and the feds, leave the National Guard out of it, could cooperate in sort of a better set of circumstances to do more about crime.
Because while the governor doesn't want to call and ask for the National Guard, the governor could call and just talk to the president and just talk him down.
Yeah, now the governor made a point that I thought was a good one, which was if I call and I tell the president I don't want the National Guard here, that could be used in court against me as I called and asked for help. And then that maybe puts us at a disadvantage if we go to court. So that was a reasonable, I thought that was an interesting point that he made.
I think the key test here is like, what are Trump's motives with this? If it's purely politics like some think, then he may very well just send the National Guard in anyway, because while California ruled that jurisdiction doesn't really extend to Illinois, so there had to be a new case. And as we saw how long it took for that one, you know, if Trump wants to score his political points, Chicago being the catch-all for folks that really want to attack Democratic cities, he gets his political points there. So I wouldn't rule that out all the way because he's not really barred from doing it with our legal system.
Yeah, one other point to make, I agree with that. Yeah. One other point to make is that it's going to depend a lot on what happens in the city. Like we saw the Labor Day weekend shootings when you had the governor and the mayor say, hey, crime's way down, and et cetera, and then you had a bad weekend.
Yeah. Well, and the president... It's important to have the historical context as well, because obviously, I mean, the Labor Day weekend, it was the most violent in 3 years after a 3-year downswing. Right. And, you know, my colleague Chip Mitchell at WBEZ, he looked into some of the historical data and found, I mean, our summer homicides are the lowest they've been since 1965. And so, you know, overall, we're seeing this trend. What we're seeing with these these holiday weekends is that we're seeing more mass shootings. We're seeing a larger percentage of the number of wounded and killed coming from fewer shootings. A quarter of this Labor Day's shootings came from just 3 incidents.
2 of them in the same neighborhood.
Yeah. And a quarter of 4th of July's shootings came from just 2 shootings. And so we're seeing, you know, shootings at large crowds taking up the bulk and putting up these numbers.
The governor has said that, you know, he's going to take immediate court action, of course, which happens a lot when the president takes an action. There's often a court action that follows up. Madison, is there anything else the governor can do to resist this?
I think he's going to continue to be publicly outspoken against this. He takes a lot of shots at the president. He does not hold back. I do think logistically challenging it in court is probably the only thing they can do. But as we've talked about, it's likely not something that would take effect or have any kind of ramifications until way after the fact, until, so to speak, the damage is done. Dozens, hundreds of people could be arrested, families torn apart, protesters potentially arrested. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see.
I think it's really important to just like say it plainly. This is not normal. This is militarized takeover of cities. This is not something that like American presidents do. So it's really unprecedented territory here.
Yeah, we're all in uncharted territory. Governor Pritzker has said that his administration has very good sources that have informed him that Governor Greg Abbott of Texas is going to mobilize members of the Texas National Guard to send them here, which sounds complicated and a little bit unconstitutional. Governor Abbott's office has told our reporters, nope, not doing that. That's not part of the plan at all. Is Governor Pritzker, Steve, is he out on a limb here with making a claim like that?
A little bit. Yeah, I think so. And that's what I meant by coming in hot. I mean, there has been a lot. The temperature needs to be ratcheted down. And we understand, everybody understands Donald Trump is not about ratcheting down temperatures, okay? So we get, everyone understands that. But if you're the governor and you're of Illinois and you're trying to keep people safe, let's remember. So let's not turn the temperature up so that we have more agitation in the streets, encouraged from the highest level of office in the state. Not explicitly, but in terms of the tone. I do think that there's reason to be, maybe it's more a matter of tone than it is of substance.
And I think Democrats locally and nationally need to be careful how they talk about this. Violence is a serious issue, and like anytime families are mourning or in pain, they don't care if crime stats are down or if numbers are down.
That's right.
You know, so at the end of the day, you have to, you know, address the now and the real pain that's happening, but also address what's working to have that trend go down and show to the country, hey, maybe these strategies work better than a militarized force.
Keep working what works. El Grito, Chicago, of course, is one of many Mexican Independence Day celebrations. It has been canceled. Madison, so far, Mexican Independence Day parades, those are still slated. What are we hearing from members of the Latino community so far?
I think organizers and neighbors are doing their best to try to remain positive. They don't want to back down in fear. They want to be able to celebrate their heritage with pride, but realistically, for some folks of this community, going to something like that could pose a risk if there are immigration officials that are going to be in these crowds. So like you mentioned, El Grito for next weekend has been canceled, but there's a festival in Pilsen that is supposed to still take place. The Little Village Festival, they have said they will not be canceling. I think the message is, do what makes you feel safe. You know, be cautious, be aware. I think everyone, you know, just speaking of like trying to strike the right tone, not wanting to fearmonger, you know, that's kind of what is trying to be done. Like the federal government wants people to be afraid, and they want people to act, you know, spontaneously and on emotion, which I understand, but they also, you know, they want to keep people safe. So I think that's kind of where things stand.
We also saw some protests outside of an ICE facility in Broadview today, and that's before any deployment, right? Of course, there's an ICE facility there. Violet, how potentially volatile do you think this situation could get? There's some of the protests now that we're looking at.
For sure. I mean, you know, so far what we've seen is folks blocking the driveway. I mean, this has been going on for months. This is nothing new. This, you know, Broadview facility has been operating. Broadview's mayor did say in a press release late last week, I believe, that the facility will be operating 7 days a week for the next 45 days. What's important to know about that holding facility is that it's not large. We don't have the capacity for immigration detention in Illinois per our state laws. And so, you know, folks are likely going to be processed pretty quick through there. But I think there are a lot of questions about what the capabilities of that facility are, especially if they're seeing these protests that are, you know, interrupting operations like that.
Okay. So let's talk about vaccines. because this week, HHS Secretary RFK Jr., a very heated hearing. We had a clip of it earlier in the show with U.S. senators this week over the CDC's change in vaccine guidance and a lot of exits from top leadership there. Brandon, what is the controversy on all of this?
The controversy overall is, one, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has come in. He was already an anti-vax kind of skeptic. Made a series of changes to top-level staff, which has caused resignations and lots of turmoil. With that, some rules changes and some rhetoric. That's also got people who are pro-vaccine very worried when he went, just a few months ago in front of some of these same senators, saying that he supported vaccines and supported the use of vaccines for everybody. That hearing we're seeing images of right there, what was striking about it was Democrats and Republicans both grilling this guy. Like, it was heated from both sides, especially that senator, I forgot his name, from Louisiana, Cassidy, yes, who was skeptical of his confirmation.
Cassidy, who was a doctor himself.
And a doctor himself, was skeptical of his confirmation in the first place and still went ahead and let him go. He was very sharp in that one. So that's really the crux of it. And the protests you're seeing around this, I've never thought I've seen like a CDC action, so much much advocacy around that, right? After there was a shooting at the CDC
and several weeks ago, right? So a lot of attention on what's happening there. So, Violet, do you think the Secretary's position, do you think he might be at risk after this performance?
I mean, he very well could be. I mean, the reality we're facing with a situation like this is dead kids, and that, I don't think bodes well for anybody.
Right, because we're talking about the COVID vaccine, those changes no longer being recommended for unless you're under a certain age or over the age of 65. Right. And if you're under that age, then you have to have the pre-existing condition.
But not only that, that rhetoric has led to Florida moving to, cut all vaccine mandates. And last year, the U.S. had the most measles cases it has in 30 years. And it saw the first measles deaths it has in a decade. And those deaths were largely children out of Texas that came in the first wave. And Illinois has seen a lot of cases itself as well. And so, this can only get worse as this, as these policies spread.
Madison, did you see any of this hearing? What was your reaction to this?
Well, I do think it was interesting, as we've pointed out, that he was catching heat from both sides. I think that surprised me because a lot of what RFK Jr. has been saying, it doesn't seem particularly new. The folks, like Brandon mentioned, who let him be confirmed, they let it happen and now want to double down and really question him. It just makes me ask, what did you think he was going to do?
Steve?
I agree with that. I think the question is whether he is in trouble. I don't think so. I think that that's all determined by Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone. And right now, at least from everything we can see, Donald Trump doesn't seem to have a problem with this. And I also think there was sort of a deal made, obviously, when RFK Jr. supported his candidacy that he would get this position. It would take more than this, I think, to really put him on the hot seat. But that was a spectacle, and if we do see some Republican members of Congress, mainly senators, get a little more courageous and make a little bit more of a stink about this, then maybe things change. So we'll see.
Violet, we also heard a little bit of reaction from some local medical experts as well. We had some of them here on the show this week. What have some of those organizations and folks said?
I think they're saying the same things they've been saying since the beginning. It's very similar to his early critics in the Senate. Just they didn't let him get confirmed. They were, essentially powerless in that scenario. But they've been ringing the alarm since day one. Again, kind of just what we talked about in that, if we continue to go down this path where, vaccines are less and less available, we're going to see, kids getting hurt. And this is an issue specifically in Chicago as well. Pre-pandemic in 2019, we saw 90% of CPS schools at herd immunity for measles vaccines. That's down to 45% last year. So more than a 50% drop off here that we're seeing. And so, again, this isn't just a far out issue. This is something that's right here at home.
Northwestern University President Michael Schill, he announced his resignation this week as well after 3 years on the job. Steve, remind us what his tenure was like for those 3 years. A little bumpy.
Yeah, real bumpy. And obviously he didn't sign up for all of this stuff, especially the Trump administration and basically attack on higher education. But there were some self-inflicted wounds too. So the Pat Fitzgerald situation, the hazing, the lawsuit that was settled very recently for some undisclosed sum of money that is presumably very high, in the tens of millions of dollars, with language that accompanied that was unusually praising of the former coach for his tenure there, that presumably was negotiated by all the lawyers who were involved, who demanded the university do that. So the university made, under Schill, made Fitzgerald look like he knew something about this and they couldn't prove it, clearly, or you wouldn't have seen any of that. So that was a big part of it, but I think that, it wasn't, based on the language in the announcements here, it looked like it might have been a sort of a mutual decision. I mean, we don't know, obviously, but it kind of looked like maybe he thought maybe it would be better to have somebody else here.
The language from the Board of Trustees kind of signaled that it was a mutual parting of ways, or almost like hey, you need to do this.
Yes.
It's also interesting. I talked to some alumni and some folks that are really connected donor-wise to Northwestern. One of their concerns, which feels a little superficial, but was that he's not a guy that ingrained himself in the Northwestern community. He's known as a very private person. And that university, they kind of patted themselves on being more community oriented and driven, and people didn't feel like they got a chance to know him. He didn't come to a lot of the events, some of the things you have to do as a president of a major university, he just wasn't doing. And so public sentiment wasn't really on his side when it came down to things at the end of the day.
And there's, of course, also the protests that happened on campus last year, his handling of that, like you said, the attacks from the Trump administration, the loss of funding, several hundred people being cut, I think 5% of the Northwestern staff just a couple of months ago.
We at the Tribune editorial board on the protests thought he handled that pretty well. I mean, we wrote as much at the time. It was obviously, you go back in time, this was an extremely difficult situation for a number of campuses. And he managed to, get a deal that got the tents torn down, that also, gave the protesters something, but not so much that, at least in our view, now obviously there are people who disagree, but at least in our view, it was a reasonable way to handle that. So actually, from our point of view, he handled that pretty well.
All right, and no word yet on who's going to replace him. I think an interim will be named. He's going to stick around until then, and then he's going to take a sabbatical. Meanwhile, Chicago.
Maybe Steve Carell.
Is he available? Has he got anything going on right now? Chicago Housing Authority still without a permanent leader. Madison, bring us up to speed on what's causing the delay over there.
Yeah, so Alderman Walter Burnett was expected to have probably already been nominated to this position. He has said that he has left City Council. And my understanding is that the holdup is that there are potential conflicts from votes that he cast as a city alderman, but also I believe he and his wife own some properties that get rented out to people with CHA subsidies. So I think that's just being given a bit of a closer look to see what the potential conflicts are there. But he told some reporters that, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But that he'd like to serve. He said he's a big proponent of the CHA's success. So we'll have to see where that goes.
And meanwhile, late this afternoon, the mayor naming the former alderman's potential replacement. Violet, what do we know?
Yeah, I mean, we saw the press release right before we jumped on air, so not much to tell right now, but we do know that Red Burnett, as opposed to Burnett Jr., going by that Burnett, nickname in the press release as well, has now been nominated by Mayor Brandon Johnson. I know that there was a brief search, no details on what that entailed or if other folks were considered, as I know he's been considered essentially the front runner from the very get-go. So, I don't think anybody is shocked to hear this, but quite the Friday night news drop.
And City Council still has to vote on this, so it'll be interesting to see how they look at it. I mean, Burnett was pretty popular within the City Council, so, maybe
His son
that
might be too.
Yeah, exactly.
If he's a chip off the old block.
Yeah.
But thanks everybody. All right, that's Week in Review. My thanks to Brandon Pope, Violet Miller, Madison Saavedra, and Steve Daniels. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Tonight's presentation of Week in Review is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, BNSF Railway, and Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Check out our website if you're on the hunt for things to do this weekend. From music in the park to a queer country fest, we have got you covered. You can see the full list at WTTW.com/news. Now, for the Week in Review, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and stay informed, and have a great weekend. Okay, so Bears are playing on Monday Night Football, blah, blah, blah. But what I really want to talk about is sports betting, because you all had an editorial this week about this nasty surprise for sports gamblers, and you're not a fan of these surprise.
25 cents on the, sports bets. Doesn't sound big in the grand scheme, but it makes you bet crazy, risky, and higher. I like little $5 bets here and there. Now I got to really do 10, 15. It's not right. I don't like it.
Breaking the bank.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, we've already seen a number of young men get into financial trouble. Not only young men, but a lot of them get into financial trouble. Some old men, even some women.
Likely some women.
But get into trouble, financial trouble, and this is just courtesy of a state desperate for revenue that ended up encouraging more people potentially go down that road.
So basically, it is a state revenue thing that's basically getting passed on to the consumer.
Correct. Yeah, and it's $36 million in revenue if they end up getting that. Well, that's not a lot of revenue at the end of the day, and this is just bad social.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm that gives back to the community through law and philanthropy.